Thanks a lot, Rohit and NN and Alcon for having me here. It's always a
Last
pleasure
talk
to be a
of
part
the
of these
session.
meetings, and I
But-
learn so much when I come here. I've been, I don't know why I'm always asked to talk about history. Okay, this is not my part of my slide. Oh. Okay. This reminds me of the time when I made my first presentation, refractive surgery, about a couple of decades back. I think it was in 1999. It was one of those large cavernous hotels in Mumbai, and it was in Hall H with some assistance with the sanitary staff. I found the place, went in. There was exactly one person in the audience. And of course, we are using the normal projector at that time. I was afraid the projectionist will walk off. Then I said, we waited for a few minutes, started presenting. And 8 minutes later, my presentation got over. I asked that one person audience, any questions? He said, no, nothing. Very crestfallen, I just collected my stride as was trying to walk off. When I had a gentle tap on my shoulders, and this, I turned around, this was a single person in the audience. Said, what do you want? Said, can you wait a minute? I'm the next speaker. So this is the kind of interest that refractive surgery used to evoke just about 15, 20 years back. And today is the second most commonly performed surgery in the human body, next only to cataract surgery. So obviously we have come a long way, and once society accepts it, we ophthalmologists accept it, it's but natural that this will grow, and that's exactly what happened to this wonderful procedure. So it essentially my interest in radial keratotomy, the fact that patients wanted vision without glasses, which I started in 1992 after a visit to Pune. This is a picture which has been taken of a patient who underwent the surgery about 20 years back. She's developing a cataract now, and still she has some good vision, but many of these patients had a hyperopic shift, subnormal vision. So, but at the same time, there was a demand for this kind of surgery, and that's what made me go on to getting something which was more relevant. Actually, this was the third installation of the Bausch & Lomb machine, the Chiron, way back in '97. And this was the first Hansetome that was brought into the country. And this was basically, when the machine was installed, this is one of the first procedures being done. I think still it's quite effective. That was Michael Noss, who came for in-service training. And the first day we started at 9 a.m. and finished at 2 a.m. the next day morning. We did 104 eyes. We were so concerned about the amount of money we are spending that we already had so many eyes lined up. And I believe even now in some of my centers, this is being done. It works consistently and very well. And it's just that you need to understand this very well. Basically, in '97 was the year when Arvind Eye Hospital opened their branch in Coimbatore. And everyone said that you have a huge institution coming up, why don't you go join them or leave town? But then I think the very fact that we have this refractive surgery not only enabled us to do refractive surgery, but also brought in patients for cataract, for retinal detachments, for that simple refraction also. So always the ability to differentiate from time to time enables you to be one step ahead of your peers, and that way I'm always indebted to refractive surgery. This is what we started out with. Nothing about aberrations, nothing about posterior cornea. We just knew it existed. It was essentially a look at the anterior cornea, a simple ultrasonic pachymeter, and basically what we see over here is the measurement of the central cornea, what we assume is the central cornea, and go ahead and treat these eyes. And mind you, most of these eyes did actually quite well. And my first brochure said minus 30 diopters, plus 12 diopters, no problem, come to us, we'll treat. And actually we did treat a few phakic eyes and ended up having reasonably good results. Not that all of them had emetropia, but significant reduction. Basically, residual cornea we left was just about 200 to 220 microns. We are not unethical, we just did not know. The term iatrogenic keratoplasia was coined in 2002, and we are doing these things in 98, 99 without even knowing about posterior cornea or its importance. So the very fact that not all of those presented with iatrogenic keratoplasia or a problem is of significance. Maybe we still do not understand what leads on to these problems, and maybe we are refusing this treatment to some of those patients who can actually get this. Finally, in 2001, we got this OP scan, which made us understand a little bit about the posterior cornea, and definitely more reliable measurements of the corneal thickness, etc. And this was the way forward. And our machine also got what's called the Xioptics. And basically the aberrations, and I think B&L did an excellent job of marketing Xioptics. Patients actually came forward asking for Xioptics treatment. I think Alcon has to step up, and I think they are doing something about Contura in this manner, and that would be the way forward. So we were so taken up by this procedure almost for a decade. Wavefront guided ablation was the way to go, and we started thinking it's not the quantity of vision, but the quality of vision, which was, not the quality, but the quantity of vision, which was important. We had discussions about 6x3, 6x2 vision, etc. We thought, how are we going to measure it once our patients start getting it? Discussions about, once you get a 6.2 vision, aren't you going to be seeing the pixels of the, on your TV rather than seeing the whole picture? And what about start seeing the pose on a girl's skin rather than looking at how beautiful she is? So obviously we realized that it was not the quantity which mattered, but the quality of vision which mattered. And that's when we got onto this wavefront optimized ablation profile, which is to me the most commonly, about 95% of our patients get this treatment even today. And that's where we are stuck on. Of course, it is possible to go ahead and do a wavefront guided and other forms of treatment, the topo guided treatment, etc. We will allude to this. Basically, what you see is the excimer laser. These are the advances that we have come across. 500 Hz to now is what's available. 750 Hz is available. Is there a great advantage is going beyond that? I do not think so. Smaller spot sizes, variable spot sizes, more homogeneous beams. Actually, when I bought this, my first laser, I was more concerned about maintaining the temperature and humidity in the room rather than about the results of that particular treatment. Because I was told this $500,000 equipment will just fail if you do not maintain between 18 to 22 degrees and 45% of humidity. So, and that was quite a challenge 20 years back. But today we are not too bothered about it. Even switching off the air conditioning is quite all right for some of these machines. Speed of treatment has obviously gone up. What my first machine used to take 11 seconds to treat 1 diopter of correction for a 6 millimeter optic zone. Today it's about 1.4 seconds. It's not the time saved, but the fact that if your flap off time is significantly less, obviously the kind of treatment results that you would get, the algorithm that can be relied upon is going to be significantly better. And now we have the several customization options. All these machines we have acquired more than these. And sometimes I realize that most of these machines reduce your refractive surgery volumes. Every time you acquire a new machine, there's a new contraindication for doing the treatment. Maybe if I just stayed on with my ultrasonic pachymeter, I'd have been doing a lot more treatments. But then I think this definitely brings on an element of greater safety and better results, especially in those difficult cases. So topo-guided treatment is something we have been doing in 2013. And obviously, mind you, in my first cases, 4 millimeters was the optic zone size we used to use just for saving up cornea. So we never realized that 5.5, 6 millimeters today is never less than 6 or 6.5 millimeters. And then all those small optic zones decentered, there was no tracking mechanism that was available in these machines. So decentration was a common problem. So even today I'm able to, I think some of the most satisfied patients in refractive surgery that you come are those who have been treated elsewhere, have inappropriate results, and subsequently you do a topo-guided treatment on them to regularize the cornea. They don't mind wearing glasses. What they want is to get back the kind of vision that they had before their cornea was intruded upon, and topo-guided treatment allows to do this. I think the Contura vision is the theme of this meeting, and obviously that's a great way to go. This is our choice of treatment as far as regular corneas, normal refractive errors are concerned. I think there will be significant discussion on this, and I'm not going to dwell upon this. Suffice it to say, for routine refractive errors, I think this might be a great way to go. Eye tracking, I think it's extremely important. Basically, what you acquire is what you treat. And when you have a cornea rotating like this, obviously this is magnified. When you have all these passive, active eye tracking, iris recognition, dynamic rotational eye tracking, which is not there with the EX500, all these things ensure that the kind of treatment results that you get is much more appropriate than what we were getting with the earlier machines. And maybe the absence of eye tracking in the SMILE is one of the disadvantages that it has. I used to pride myself with the fact that saying that first 8 years of my refractive surgery that I have not done a single PRK. But I thought that that was for people who could not afford a Hansetome or who could not afford the cost of blades. But my concept has completely changed. Obviously today, it's most often femtoLASIK or SMILE, but we do PRK very rarely, a microkeratome assisted laser correction. And then these are the various indications for that. I think as far as corneal hysteresis is concerned, PRK is a great way to go and maybe leaves behind the most stable corneas. And these are the various options that you have as far as PRK is concerned. We have done them all. Basically, finally we decided that it's the excimer laser. Transepithelial PRK seems to work quite optimally. Seems to be least intrusive. Patients are also quite comfortable and there is greater control over this. Mind you, 6 months down the line, all these different treatments will give you nearly exactly the same results. But on the table, I find that a transepithelial PRK doing 2 shots of the excimer laser seems to be a good idea. These femtoflaps came in 2008 and basically the FS200 is a good machine. The various other options, we have tried almost all of them except perhaps the Zyma, and all of these seem to work well. Definitely bringing in an element of accuracy and precision as far as your flaps are concerned, so that the stroma that you treat is pristine and of a great quality. And as applications itself is concerned, just in a matter of 7 to 8 years, we have all these indications. This is not something from the textbook. This is what we use it routinely. I'm sure most of you are doing it. Penetrating keratoplasty, lamellar keratoplasties, intracorneal ring segments, inlays, keratotomy, lenticular extraction, presbyopia, and of course femtolaser cataract surgery. I believe the 70s belonged to ECC and intraocular lenses, were rather ICC, 80s to ECC and intraocular lenses, 90s to the excimer laser, 2000 and beyond to femtolaser. I think that we are still scratching the surface as far as the application of this technology is concerned. Is over time we will explore it to its fullest limits. SMILE, of course, we acquired in 2014, and I think it's a definite addition to the kind of modalities of treatment that we have. It has the major advantage that you do not have a flap. It's PRK without pain and minimal dissection. Biomechanically may not be a great advantage. But then the cons are that the limited range, of course the range has increased now, more tissue consumption for each diopter of correction that is there, no tracking mechanism that's there, enhancement comes at a significant cost unless you are doing a PRK. PRK is not possible, topo-guided treatment is not possible, cost is significantly more. Having said that, if you can afford it, have both the mechanism. If you can't, maybe a good excimer machine is the way to go. As far as corneal biomechanics is concerned, I think we have hardly understood that. Even today with all the machinery, all the experience that we have, if a -2 diopter patient comes to me and wants an assurance that her refractive error will be completely corrected, we can't do that. That's because we do not understand corneal biomechanics completely. We got this machine Ora some time back, but then we found that it was not quite appropriate, and the results were not predictable. Measured over a period of time, the results were variable. So we got this Corvus in 2017 for about a year and a half. Results seem to be much better with this, but having said that, still we have not reached the limits. Even in a cross-link cornea, you can't prove that the corneal hysteresis has significantly improved. It's basically the lab studies which tells you that, and it's availability of better modalities is important, and that's what we are awaiting. I think I'll skip all this. We look at this very carefully now. and you look at this TBI at the bottom, the topographic biomechanical index, and whenever it crosses anything beyond 0.5, that's a relative contraindication. Of course, it is something which comes from corneal biomechanics as well as the BAT-D of the pentacam, but it's not an average of the two, but various measures are taken into consideration. We can have a whole day of discussion on this, but basically as far as biomechanical considerations is concerned, this is what we have reached clinically as of now. We started CXL in the year 2007, almost 11 years back. That was the prototype machine that we had. And today, of course, we have a more advanced machine. And combining these treatments with the CXL seems to be a good idea. Though I believe that if you are combining it, PRK would be the way to go. Because once you have the corneal flap and treating through that, whether it's Smile Extra or whether it's LASIK Extra, then I do not think that this treatment works too well. And PIXL for low myopia, where you just do a collagen cross-linkage. We did as an experimental study for 50 odd eyes, and actually up to -2 diopters, it gives fairly good results. We also did topo-guided cross-linking, so that certain areas were cross-linked with this matrix machine, and that again seemed to be giving good results, and that's something which has to be established over time. And that's the matrix machine that we are using, and that's customized CXL as well as PIXL treatment that's possible. Intracorneal ring segments, of course, I'm just rapidly running through all the different modalities that we're using. It was phakic intraocular lenses way back in 2002. My good friend Partha and myself went to Germany, watched, who's that? Burkhard Dick doing his surgery, and then came back and started doing it. But because of the endothelial being problems that we had, we shifted over to phakic, posterior chamber phakic intraocular lenses. And today I use both the Indian as well as the imported versions with equal felicity. I think we have a reasonably good Indian lens that's available to us. And combining procedures, especially to optimize results as far as extremes of refractive error is concerned, is a great way to go. Look at these trioptics. I think that was basically this patient developed iatrogenic keratosis, underwent cross-linking. 2 years later, underwent ring segments were put in, and once the refractive error and the cornea was stable, year later we actually put in a phakic intraocular lens, and you can see a ICL being, toric ICL being put in. So obviously once you customize treatment, it's also these extremes of issues that can be treated over time. And of course, Relax, a piggyback intraocular lens, is when you have an extremes of hyperopia and the anterior chamber depth does not allow you to put an ICL, maybe this is a great way to go. I would like to run these videos a little faster, but it's not possible here. That's a patient who has already received a plus 40 diopter lens. Basically, the refraction was 16 diopter, and that was 56 diopters. What we had a residual was plus 6 diopters. And what we are putting in is a plus 9 diopter Sulcoflex lens, because of which this patient almost landed up with near emetropia. So combining these different technologies optimally has a great way, is the way forward. For a long time, refractive surgery was considered a single procedure specialty. You had just radial keratotomy initially, then it was PRK, then subsequently LASIK. Today, I think if you're a serious refractive surgeon, you should be doing almost all of this. Pick and choose each and every one of your patients according to their requirements and according to their ability to pay for it. So finally, I think the past is a place of reference, not a place of residence. I strongly believe the ride for me is still not over. There's still some journey left, and the joy is finally in the journey. Thank you so much.